Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us at the 2021 Pittsburgh TechFest. We're really excited to welcome SoftWriters this morning to the presentation. And first, we have some words from Beth Davis.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Beth Davis. I am the leader of people at SoftWriters and excited to be here with you all today. I joined the company this year because I really wanted to be a part of a workplace that is doing good with and for many and focusing on how we create value for our customers and allow them to do what they do best, which is to help save lives. Our products and services are for long-term care pharmacies. We're a market leader in that space, and we really get to help them make sure that they're getting the life-enhancing and life-saving medication to the most vulnerable people in long-term care facilities. And our mission is to save lives, to be a part of that process. And honestly, if you want to be a part of a company that walks its talk, please join us. We're agile-minded. We share responsibility for our company's health, and we have a lot of great things happening. And I'm very glad and grateful to work for such a great company here in Pittsburgh. I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Stephen Morrissey first, who recently joined us in the past several months to lead our user experience. And of course, you'll hear from our product leader, Deepika, Devarajan here in a minute. So with that, Stephen, over to you.
Hi. Every day at SoftWriters, the UX and product team strives to avoid dark patterns, meet accessibility standards, and create security features that our customers will actually use. However, at a higher level, we all need to consider the unintended effects of our products on customers and society several years into the future. And I think this is where Deepika intends to take us today. Deepika, on to you.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Beth. Thanks for the introduction and good morning and welcome to TechFest. I am so excited to speak to you about a topic that is very close to my heart and so important in today's technology age. My name is Deepika Devarajan. I lead product management and engineering at SoftWriters. It's a growing Pittsburgh-based health tech company. And I'll be referring to content that I compiled on my website, deeplyproduct.com, from when I embarked on my journey to understand how I could contribute towards responsible innovation. Now, before we get started, we will be using the polling and reaction features on Zoom, and I'd like to take a minute for us to test it out. So can all of you give me a quick yes or a check mark on your Zoom reaction? Let's see, I just want to make sure that everybody can get to the reactions. Hit the green check mark. All right, that's coming through, perfect. Thank you. All right. Now, before I jump into my presentation, I want to run a quick poll. And my question to you is, did you apply for a job in the last 18 months? And if yes, did AI play a role in your job application? And for this, I'm going to launch the poll. And hopefully all of you can see it. I'll give you about 30 seconds to respond. The pandemic has reset our expectations on our choices for work. And it's not just remote or hybrid or office work. We find ourselves in this new market where, we as tech workers can decide who we want to work for, where we want to work, what type of work we're willing to do, what are the boundaries we want to set for ourselves. And it's a hot market for job seekers. So job applications are booming. So again, did you apply for a job? And if yes, did AI play a role? And I have to look carefully here for responses. I'm going to end the poll now and share results. So it looks like about 40% of you did look for a job. And I was in that candidate pool because I joined SoftWriters about a year ago. And majority of you believe that no, AI really did not play a role in your job application. So here's the deal. If you used any recruiting platform, whether it's LinkedIn, Glassdoor, Career Builder, ZipRecruiter, Indeed, know that AI definitely played a role It decided what jobs to show you, which companies saw your resume, and it even made references of your skills based on non-explicit data that's captured about you. And I'll give you an example. LinkedIn can predict what software development skills you have based on which companies you worked for, even if you did not include your skills in the resume. So just think about that. And I'm going to share a couple more useful tidbits about hiring. This past weekend, I heard an interesting podcast about the applications of AI in hiring. And here are some gotchas for me. AI may be filtering out resumes because you did not play high school lacrosse. Now, you could get a screening call from a bot for an interview where you answer a few questions over a phone call. The bot analyzes your responses. Many of us may have not experienced this, but consider in the case of companies that have to filter candidates from over thousands of applicants. Now, what's interesting is that candidates figured out they can score high if you speak very confidently, even if you speak gibberish. And it didn't matter what language you were speaking the gibberish in. You could speak gibberish in German or Mandarin, and still the AI system would score you high if you speak confidently. Recruiting platforms claim they can detect your personality within 30 seconds of a recorded video interview. And AI can also evaluate you differently depending on what background you've got. Well, right now I've got a SoftWriters background, whether you wear glasses. And the next time you give a recorded video interview, know that facial analysis during a video interview provides a measure of traits like dependability, emotional intelligence, cognitive ability. Even though all of this has been debunked by science, science says facial analysis cannot measure those traits. And for all you gamers in this room here, interview games are now becoming common, especially for entry-level roles. You have to go through a couple of game steps. So your level of risk aversion may be measured by how many balloons you can pump and keep afloat, or your level of patience may be measured by how well you play Tetris. So just think about that. Are you intrigued? So if you're in the job market and want to hear some of the details of how algorithms may be deciding your fit, check out this mini series from MIT's Technology Review. It was released this July, and I found it fascinating. So let's take a step back. When AI was introduced in hiring several years ago, it promised this future where machines could select the best candidates for a job role because machines didn't have human biases. Machines wouldn't hire people like ourselves, but it would try to bring more diversity into the workforce. And over the last few years, the use of AI in hiring has been a highly debated topic. It's a great example of intentions for building good tech that have gone the wrong way. Now, many of the applications of AI in hiring are, in my opinion, just irresponsible. And the scary part is AI is commonly being used at scale in all large organizations, one way or the other, to make hiring decisions. So what's this talk about? I mean, I gave you a sense of where technology is today. We are here at TechFest because we work in technology. We want to get involved in tech. Now, in our jobs, we play different roles in the conception, the creation, the commercialization, and consumption of technology products and services. We see daily examples of how disruptive tech, like AI, machine learning, robotics, they all have the potential to do significant good, but they can also cause significant harm to humanity. And I believe we all have a shared ownership to shape the future of tech with responsible innovation. But how do you get started? This was the question I was asking myself a few years ago. And I'm hoping by the end of this presentation, irrespective of what role you play in tech, you are armed with the context, the resources, and the tools to ask the right questions, drive the right discussions, and make your impact towards championing responsible innovation. Let me go one step back. I'm going to run another poll to get a quick sense of who is in the audience. So let me see. Quick question for the audience. Have you all been seeing my slides?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you. Okay, my second poll here is up. And I want to get a sense of what domain do you most closely identify with in your professional life? And I'll give it maybe another 10 seconds. Okay. And let's share some of these results. So a majority of you are in software development, some in product management, user experience. Excellent. We have a broad swath of people. The good news is my talk, the content that I have to share, is content that all of you can relate to. So let me share a little bit about my journey and experiences in technology and business so that I can put this in context of what I'm going to share with you. So I'm an electrical engineer. I have a graduate degree in computer engineering from The Ohio State University. So if you have any alums from OSU, go Buckeyes. And I started out my career in hardware engineering for a startup company in Pittsburgh over 20 years ago. I worked in software development. I worked in R&D for a few years before I jumped ship to the dark side of business into product management and marketing. I'm also a graduate of the University of Pittsburgh's Katz Graduate School of Business. So for those of you who are Pitt grads, go Panthers. I love working with products, working for startups where I wore multiple hats to much more structured roles in large enterprises. And about 6 years ago, I joined IBM Watson and had an opportunity to really work with across different roles in product, technical product management, go-to-market, digital, growth, marketing, and really working on some of the most cutting-edge technologies in big data analytics, cloud, AI, machine learning, and so on, and bringing Watson products to market. And that's where I started my journey into, hey, this is awesome tech, but are we really thinking through the consequences of this tech? For the last year, I've had the privilege of working at SoftWriters. As Beth mentioned earlier, we build innovative pharmacy solutions, and I want to give a shout out to the team for receiving a top workplace award in Pittsburgh again in 2020. We are hiring, and we'll share more details about the company shortly. I'm also a passionate advocate for women in technology and leadership, as well as STEM outreach initiatives. I serve on the Executive Council for the Society of Women Engineers in the Pittsburgh section. So if you're interested in joining SWE, drop me a line. We're always looking for volunteers and folks who are passionate about STEM. And the other community that I want to talk about is a community of AI enthusiasts in Pittsburgh called PGHAI, where I volunteered my time to build awareness and education. PGHAI is supported by the Partnership to Advance Responsible Tech, which is a Pittsburgh-based nonprofit that offers expert consultation, education. Again, if you're interested in checking out PART or PGHAI, just Google them and use the contact form to drop them a line. And then a little bit about SoftWriters. We're a Pittsburgh-based software company. We have our offices in the north of the city in McCandless Township, and we build pharmacy management software for institutional pharmacies. Now, these are not retail pharmacies like CVS or Rite Aid, but these are pharmacies that are specialized closed-door pharmacies that serve long-term care facilities. And we operate in a niche market, but we have to solve for very complex problems in pharmacy operations. And again, as Beth mentioned, we serve a population of very vulnerable patients in senior living facilities. It's an exciting time to bring innovation to this underserved industry, and I'm just so grateful to have the opportunity to bring it, to contribute towards it, and also bring in responsible approaches to building solutions. Earlier this year, the team came together to roll out a vaccine management solution for long-term care facilities in short order when the nursing homes were hardest hit by the coronavirus. And when I think back to the time when the teams were working nonstop over the holidays, just so that they could hit our, we believed in our mission to save patient lives, and we could get product out to our customers when they most needed it. So it's a passionate group of people. We have about 125 employees, and we're a small and mighty team. And what really drives us is our core values. And we take our core values seriously. And I see examples of how we live these core values every day. And with these core values comes that deep sense of responsibility to build the right thing, to build it right, and also to treat the team right while innovating responsibly. So we are looking to add to the SoftWriters family. If this is exciting for you, come talk to us, drop us a line. We have our the contact information available. And Beth, if you don't mind, if you can drop that in chat, that'd be wonderful. Now, tying this all back to my journey with responsible innovation, right? As a builder of technology products, my passion is in building products that solve high-value problems with disruptive innovation. And in this quest of sorts, I've been heavily invested in trying to better understand our users, our markets, our technologies. What can we do to help our customers easily conquer some of their jobs to be done? And how can they have positive experiences while doing those jobs? And I truly believe in the transformational value of technology to better people's lives. Now, take the flip side of it. As a consumer and user of technology, I've also experienced how pervasive technology has become in my life. And I sometimes find it hard to draw that line between usefulness and invasiveness. We've all done this, right? We pick up our devices to look for a quick answer to a question. And then before you know it, we've spent 15 minutes or a half hour. And you may have family or friends or others, trying to interact with you, but we are so consumed with what's in our hands. These platforms we have at our fingertips, they've mastered how to captivate us with engaging and compelling content. They figured out how to customize to exactly what we need. They nudge us to behaviors we did not intend. And here I'm not even referring to technology built with malicious intent. It's really technology built with not enough intention about its use. And this is where I've thought a lot about this. And there is a really fine line between what I believe are polar views, between engagement and addiction, between personalization and stereotyping, between simplification and exclusion. And as I was looking and researching this, I found there's little regulation today to help protect us as individuals from this pervasive technology that may or may not support human values. I'll say this, I'm not in policy, I'm not an activist. What I know best is to build high-value user-centered products. So I started researching, what can I do differently to build these types of innovative technology products, but do it with intention. So with that, let me start with what is responsible tech. It's a trending buzzword, but it doesn't really have any concrete definition around it as a technical term. So I'm going to go back to another phrase that's been around for longer, technology ethics. And one of the resources that I want to point you all to is the Santa Clara University's Marcola Institute of Applied Ethics. They have the most comprehensive set of resources related to ethics, not just technology ethics, all aspects of ethics. You could deep dive into applied ethics in government, in campus ethics, leadership ethics, and even sports ethics. Now, coming back to technology ethics, right? This covers fundamental ethical questions that we should be asking of new technologies to evaluate what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is evil. Some of the early work from SCU was around medical tech, weapons tech, social media, and they've all required deep ethical thinking. So what should we be doing with these powers now that we have developed them? What are we trying to achieve? How can this technology help or harm people? What does a good, full human life look like? They also coined the term internet ethics, and I want to read out a few of the topics that internet ethics covers. And I'd like you to think about, okay, what may be ethical questions that come in here. Big data, bots, social media, net neutrality, surveillance, search engines, energy use, cyberbullying, the right to be forgotten, online comments, cybersecurity, gamification, sentiment analysis, crowdfunding, hashtags. There's a lot in there, but you can see the different ways in which, if you don't think through the intentional way in which technology affects us, it can cause harm. Now, let me try to make this real with connecting ethical thinking with a brand new technology that the software folks on this call can relate to. Technology that I believe was built with the best of intentions and can do a lot of good for us. So I'm going to go back and ask a question on, let's do reactions for this one. GitHub Copilot. Who's familiar with GitHub Copilot? Can you give me a green check if you've heard of it? We've got about 6 people. So this is a new technology, which GitHub is, by the way, a Microsoft company right now. It was launched June of this year in technical preview. And it's a super cool technology innovation. They marketed it as an AI pair programmer. And it's a plugin to Microsoft Visual Studio Code. And what it does, it auto-generates code for you based on context and cursor location. But what's really cool about this is it goes beyond autocomplete. It doesn't just suggest line completions, it gives you entire function bodies. And underlying this is an open AI codex AI system, which is a language model. And this language model was trained on public internet text and billions of lines of code. So for anybody who's used, say, Tab 9, think of this as Tab 9 on steroids. Some of the key benefits that they've listed on their website are that it synthesizes code. You can describe the logic in a comment and it'll convert it to code. It autofills for repetitive code patterns. It suggests tests that match implementation of your code for unit tests. Great positive feedback from the developer community, and it's super exciting. I remember a long time ago when I first worked in an IDE, that the autocomplete codes, the automated builds, it just freed up time for me to focus on more creative and thinking work. And that's the same promise from Copilot. Now, since its release, there are some concerns being raised. When you think about it, it's all good tech, right? And here's where ethical thinking comes into the picture. There's a concern about open source. This is an AI system that's trained on publicly available code under a variety of licenses. Is it going to generate code identical to open source code? Could that breach open source licenses? GitHub really didn't think through some of these implications when they rolled this out. So there's no safeguards and no way of knowing whether the code that's being generated is okay for you to use. There are some quality concerns. Some early adopters have indicated that the quality is poor, the code is old. And this then begs the question, what data was used for training? What's the quality of the training data? What's the provenance of the data is not clear. And then think about the language model, the OpenAI Codex language model, right? It's still immature. It's a black box model. So what that means is you don't know how the AI made the decisions to provide you with the output. You just know that it's using a neural network to come up with a recommendation. And it's inherently biased. And what I mean by that is there's an automation bias where, as humans, we favor automated decision-making systems. And there's an anchoring bias as well. So it's great tech. I love the tech. But then I also take a pause and say, okay, there are broader implications of this tech. So this is an example again, but I believe the technology was intentionally built for good, but there are concerns being raised about the technology. Now, what happens when those good intentions come last? I don't think we are at a tech apocalypse by any means, but I do think if we can get there, if we're not responsible with how we think about technology and ask the question, just because we can build it, should we? And there are three things that bother me about tech innovation today. The first is around the irresponsible use of data, the irresponsible design of products, and the irresponsible applications of AI. Now, I'm going to talk through each of these with a few examples, and I'm going to share a lot of resources that I've come to depend on to stay abreast of what's happening in these spaces. So I'm going to slightly shift to lecture mode as I talk through this content. So let's talk about the irresponsible use of data. There are several aspects of data use that I get very passionate about, and this is between privacy and surveillance, consent and disclosure, misinformation and disinformation, and the difference over there is really about intention. And when you think about large data sets, bias and fairness. Some of you may have heard of Clearview AI. This is a company that scraped billions of photos from the internet, including from platforms like LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, with no consent from the owners of the photos. And it sells access to that image database to law enforcement agencies, so that when an officer uploads a photo or a video image containing a person's face, the app matches it up to what was found online. Now, this story was first broken in the New York Times, not this January, but last January. And since then, there have been several incidents of high-profile, these are high-profile incidents of wrongful arrests, where the system mistakenly linked a person to someone else. And in spite of all the negative PR the company has received, this product, this is a massive surveillance apparatus, is still being used by different law enforcement authorities. So always think about posting anything online. You don't know who's going to use it. Let me switch to a different example here. And I'm going to go back to a quick poll here. Actually, not a poll. Let's do reactions. How many of you use Alexa, Ring, or any other Amazon home automation device? Give me a green check. If you use any of Amazon's Alexa, Echo, or Ring devices, but half of you do, a little bit more than half. So Amazon made news last year when it rolled out a new set of products and services selling surveillance as a service. And this is where you have Alexa Echo speakers that became listening devices to guard your empty houses, or you have Home Cam, which is a drone that flew in your home to periodically inspect your house. You had a car cam, which was again based on the Ring video doorbell technology and gave you a live feed from the interior of your car. You're always being watched. Now this year, just a couple of months ago, Amazon activated Sidewalk network. And Sidewalk, for those of you who've not heard about it, it automatically shares your internet connection with neighbors unless you turn it off. You have to go and explicitly opt out of it. So you have no control over what sort of data flows over the Sidewalk wireless network. And until now, it was all, you expected your wireless network to be contained. It's no longer the case. So if you have an Amazon device and you haven't heard of Sidewalk, please Google it and figure out how to opt out. Now, here's another ethical question in relation to deepfakes. Now, deepfakes are either images or videos, and more recently, audio of a person that's being replaced with somebody else's likeness. And in a recent documentary about the now deceased Anthony Bourdain, the director chose to create a segment using deepfake audio, but did not reveal that they were using AI to the audience. And these were words that were never previously uttered by Mr. Bourdain. And this led to a lot of ethical questions. Who needs to give consent over here? And the other ethical question is about disclosure. Should the public have been made aware that the voice was fake? Now, beyond filmmaking, deepfakes are creating so much more distrust with technology as our data becomes publicly available. Well, if I cannot talk about irresponsible use of data if I don't talk about misinformation. And Facebook and other social media platforms, they're all fighting misinformation and disinformation, but it's like whack-a-mole. Started even today with COVID fake news. There are several ethical questions related to content moderation on social media platforms. And many of the debates today revolve around a binary decision of, do you keep that content up or do you take it off? However, there are a much more broader set of interventions that can be used to address misinformation and disinformation beyond simple removal. And there are new questions. The new questions are also with the intervention approach, who gets to decide, why should it be removed, and so on. The Partnership on AI, it's an industry consortium that summarized potential approaches to identifying interventions. So if you're working to fight misinformation, this is a must read for folks who care about this, this problem that's grown drastically in our society. Let me shift a little bit to the irresponsible design of products. One of the books that I love is Technically Wrong from Sarah Wachter-Bocher. And she captures so many real world examples of biased tech design and how to overcome them. Now take an example of designing a form on a web page that accepts a name. Now typically we design for a John Smith, but there is a significant percentage of users who are already marginalized that can have trouble using the form if they have long names, hyphenated names, Indigenous people names, Native American names, international names, names with accents, anything that doesn't conform to a clean John Smith. And when you think about it, many forms still don't allow for an input for ethnicity that accommodates multiple races. Then let's talk about defaults. We talked about this in the context of Amazon Sidewalk. The design choices we make reinforce bias. So thinking about gender bias, why should the default voice of an assistant on a smartphone be that of a woman's? Let's talk about personas. Personas were meant to provide a representation of a group of people, and it leans heavily on demographics. But when we use personas for empathetic design, we should instead prioritize defining the persona based on what are their motivations, what are the challenges behind what people want, how they interact with tech, rather than on, a 25-year-old woman living in Kansas. Let's talk about use cases. In many cases, we design for the average or the typical use case journey. What is more important is that you design for stress cases. And this is so important for inclusive design. When you think about where would the design break down when you consider stress, anxiety, and urgency for the user. And stress cases can help design for user journeys that fall beyond your ideal circumstances, your ideal assumptions. So it's a different way of thinking about use cases, but very powerful. And for those of you who are or know somebody who is very attached to technology, there's a great book that I recommend called Irresistible by Autumn Alter. And it's really about addictive technology, dark patterns, and keeping us hooked. And I've recommended it to a few folks who I know have an over-reliance on devices. Now, I've talked about data, I've talked about design. Before I talk about AI, I want to just get a sense of, how many people on this call, let me ask this question, how many people on this call work with AI or ML technologies in your professional role? Let's do a quick yes, no. Not many. Okay, so I'm going to do a quick overview of AI and how it's different from traditional software, because I think it's important for all of us as consumers to understand this. So think about it this way. When you have typical software, typical programmatic way of building software, you have a set of rules and an algorithm that gives you a specific output for a specific input. The outputs are always deterministic. When you consider machine learning, with machine learning, you work with large data sets and you identify patterns in that data set to provide what are called predictions, and you optimize for an objective function, for a goal. Now, in the case of machine learning, we don't know why exactly the output was derived from the input. It's not deterministic. And there are a few challenges over here. If you have the wrong data for the model to work off, then if your data set is biased, then your outputs are going to be off. The algorithms themselves learn over time and they can have high error rates, and you don't know what the error rates can be when you start off with an AI model. And the goal that the AI works towards, that can also change over time and may no longer be relevant. So there are a lot of unknowns with machine learning technology, which makes it, which leads to the fact that you really don't know whether the outputs that you're getting are the right outputs. So all of these contribute to unpredictable outcomes that are not explainable. Now, add to this the fact that AI technology is at its most rapid pace of innovation. And by the way, we still are waiting for regulation in the United States. So there's a lot to pack with ethical AI. And if you want to learn more about how AI is making its way through society, let me just go a couple of slides, a couple of clicks here. Our own Carnegie Mellon has a group called the Block Center, and they've put together a podcast called Consequential. It's a very engaging and insightful overview of some of the challenges we have as a society across different industries, from education to medicine. I recommend this if you just want to get aware, get more educated on societal implications of AI. Now, having said that, is all AI bad? Should we abandon it? Absolutely not. There's a very valuable role for AI to play. And a book, again, that I'll drop over here is called Human and Machine, Reimagining Work in the Age of AI. And what this book speaks to is a future of how may machines augment humans. It looks at the strengths of humans and machines, and it says some tasks can be performed only by humans. And these may be tasks that that are related to how we lead, how we empathize, how we create, how we judge. And there are other tasks that are more effectively performed by machines, repetitive tasks, redundant tasks, where you need to have replication. And then there's a set of activities where humans and machines can collaborate as symbiotic partners to form hybrid activities. So there are 8 new fusion skills that this book speaks to, of how man and machine can collaborate in a new world. A good example is something called intelligent interrogation. How do you extract answers from an AI agent across different levels of abstraction, and so on. So I think we most definitely should not abandon AI. It does have the opportunity to create good for us, but we need to focus on how AI can augment humans while being centered on human values. That doesn't always happen. And so much so that we have our own branch of AI ethics. A few more resources that I'm going to share over here. Another podcast called In Machines We Trust. This is the podcast that also had the piece about hiring. If you want to keep up to date on AI applications, just hit subscribe here. I've been dropping a few book recommendations. I want to drop a movie recommendation here called Coded Bias. It's a documentary on algorithmic bias from some of the leading women voices who are part of the Algorithmic Justice League. Great investment of an hour. But my best book, my go-to book, has always been Weapons of Math Destruction. Math, not math, math destruction. It's a foundational book from Cathy O'Neill. She's a mathematician and came in from the finance world. It appeals to the masses. It's written in a very engaging style. She talks about racial and criminal justice, some of the Compass software that's used for profiling individuals, some of the bias algorithms used in financial industries, and so on. So more resources for you to get smart on AI. As this interest in AI applications has skyrocketed, so has the number of frameworks and principles and guidelines. So much so that when I said, okay, all of this is great, I understand the problem. Now, how do I solve for it? I just found a lot of resources that spoke about, okay, here's a better way of looking at AI. There are over 170 frameworks that were inventoried by Algorithm Watch. The challenge with these frameworks and guidelines and principles is that they all have the best of intents, but they cannot easily be put in practice. And I had mentioned earlier that there is no regulation in the US, no federal regulation enforcing how AI can be ethically used. There is regulation at a state level. The good news is earlier this year, in January of 2021, the National Artificial Intelligence Initiative was established to promote US leadership in AI R&D, and it coordinates ongoing AI activities across different agencies. It was, again, established just 7 months ago, But I wanted to share that as, okay, there is regulation coming, it's not here yet. So back to building products, right? Having now seen the variety of guidance that is available, and I think back on all the cross-functional product teams that I've been part of, I do believe there's a way in which each of you can have a hand in shaping responsible tech. It doesn't matter whether you're in support or in sales or in marketing or in DevOps or in research. I want to share a few foundational principles and then share with you some of the tools towards putting those principles in practice. First of all, diversity is critical. Anytime you build technology products, you need to have strong cross-functional product teams. And I'd even go so far as to say, hire cultural misfits, bring in a different point of view, people who don't think like you, and bring in inclusive design. Also create an environment where you can have that courageous discussion and promote conflicting perspectives. That culture of questioning is so important for us to drive to the right outcomes. Secondly, go for minimum viable data. I'm a data geek. I've drunk the Kool-Aid on data-driven decisions. I truly believe I cannot improve if you cannot measure it. I love analytics, but I've changed my perspectives over time to say, what user data do I really need? And do I really need to know all of this to have the necessary data that I need to make certain decisions? I recently read an article on Slack's product management approach, and what struck me was, unlike Google and Facebook and most big tech companies who claim that they're data-driven, Slack took pride in that they were data-informed versus data-driven, and how they were valuing qualitative measures over tons of data gathering. And lastly, agile experiments in learning. I think many of you on this call are very familiar with agile in today's pace of innovation, pace of social expectations. It's so important to be able to say, okay, I'm going to try this. I have a hypothesis. I'm going to try this, and I'm going to measure it. And if it doesn't work, I'm going to just try again, figure out what I learned. So this mindset of measuring outcomes and course correcting is super important. Now I'm going to transition. I think I'm almost going to be out of time here. So I'm going to transition to a few tools that you can use around Ethical Explorer, Ethical Canvas, and AI blind spots, and run through these quickly. So the Ethical Explorer field guide is available from the OMDR network. It's on ethicalexplorer.org. And what it does is it helps groups with conversation starters and brainstorming questions. And the intent is to trigger dialogue. How do you identify risks early before you build the product? And potentially leveraging that wisdom of a cross-functional diverse team, right? The guide identifies 8 different tech risk zones. Each risk zone prompts questions for that can either be explored as an individual, in a group discussion, or as part of a workshop. So let me hit a couple of these. If we talk about data control, this is how do we enable transparency? What data are we collecting? How do we limit it? How do we give users choice over what they share and how we use their data? Let's take another one, surveillance. How do you protect privacy? Do we identify individual users and trends? How could personally identifiable information, PII, be used against the interests of our users? What could third parties or governments do with this data? Addiction, I talked about addiction earlier in terms of promoting healthier behavior. Is our business model based on engagement? How long are users on my page or on my app? How can I get them to interact more? Are those high levels of engagement with our product detrimental to healthy behaviors of our users? How might extreme use or unhealthy engagement look like with our tech? What well-being metrics can we anchor to? That's being responsible. The toolkit itself is free to download, so please incorporate it in your software development process. Again, it's not restricted to any specific role, irrespective of whether you're a DevOps person or an engineer or a UX designer. Anyone can bring this to the table. The ethics canvas is another tool. And for folks who've used the business model canvas to lay out a business vision or strategy, this should look familiar. Again, it's better as a group exercise because you get that collective wisdom of the group to really look at the extent of ethical implications for new products and services. Who are your products users? What are their demographics? How might your product impact relationships of people and groups, and so on. The last tool I'm going to speak to is the AI blind spots cards. This is from MIT Media's assembly program, and it lays out activities based on what they call a phased discovery process of planning, building, and deploying products. Now, similar to the Ethical Explorer Guide, there are 8 thoughtful activities that you walk through. Now, with the exception that this is focused on AI products. Now, big tech is big on AI, and many of the big tech companies that have a large AI presence have internal teams dedicated to championing responsible tech. And I wanted to share some of these references as well, because most of these companies have, they've come up with useful approaches, case studies, and content that you can reuse. Now, having said that, I'll say responsible innovation is not always, while most organizations want to do it, it is not always a priority in many organizations, because it limits your degrees of freedom. It adds cost to the bottom line, and there is no regulation forcing responsible practices. So, and many of these teams have also come under scrutiny with exits of high-profile ethics leaders from big tech, because it's tough to be the voice of change. There are other champions of responsible AI. I mentioned Partnership on AI. The World Economic Forum has a huge collection of resources and initiatives around this area. And Data and Society is another nonprofit that has content worth checking out. I'm going to skip over this slide in the interest of time to allow questions and say, conclude with, just because we can build it, should we? We have a shared ownership to shape the future of tech with responsible innovation. And my goal with this talk is really to bring awareness of the new and different ways technology is driving our lives. And as builders and creators of technology, we need to always ask the question, just because we can build it, should we? So I hope I've armed you with context, resources, and tools to ask the right questions, drive the right discussions, make an impact. With that, I will do a quick final poll and take questions. All right. I'm not sure if Taylor is on.
I'm here.
Do we have any questions, Taylor? I wasn't looking at chat at all.
No problem. We did have someone ask if you could provide a list of all the book and movie recommendations that you mentioned in your PowerPoint. So I'll follow up with you after the presentation to get that list, as well as some of the links that were in your presentation to include with the recording online, so it's an easy access for our attendees here.
Absolutely.
So one question came in from Justin. Given the way AI research often depends on funding from the same tech companies which benefit most from AI, do you have any thoughts about how researchers can maintain independence and objectivity, especially when the research raises issues with the technology?
That's a great question. And I'd mentioned earlier about a few high-profile exits. One of the recent exits was from Google's AI ethics research team, where the leaders within that organization they were publishing content which would not serve the business direction that Google wanted to head, and they chose to leave the organization. There are several organizations outside of corporate where research work is taking off. A great resource is the Montreal AI Ethics Institute. They've got a really great group of volunteer researchers, researchers in different universities that come together as part of meetups to really bring education, bring awareness around ethical AI and ethical technology.
Awesome. We have one other question from Stephen. I've been at companies that did not appear to care about AI ethics. What can a line level employee do to raise these concerns?
I'd go back to the tools that I shared earlier, starting as a line level employee to say, okay, where can we bring up questions of what we are building, and bring those tools into the building process, more from a grassroots perspective. Now, from an organizational perspective, I think it comes down to education and awareness, being able to share learnings and share from, this no dearth of irresponsible technology interventions that happen every day. You pick up any newspaper, you're going to see it. Now, how can you connect that back to what you're working on and how you'd like to see it change is really being able to bring that voice in. And you can do that with the tools that I shared.
Great. And then looks like Lisa's offering some advice, maybe voice your concerns through an employee resource group.
There's always listening posts within an organization to amplify those concerns.
Yeah, for sure. I don't see any other questions in the chat, but if anything arises, you can always email the speaker as well as myself if you need some information. But thank you so much for the presentation. It was very insightful. Our next session will be at 10 o'clock. It is our networking session. We'll be breaking up everyone into small groups and then switching them about 15 minutes in. So you get to network with some of the attendees here at TechFest and maybe talk to some of our SoftWriter employees and maybe some of our speakers as well. So thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank you, Taylor. Thanks for the privilege of speaking with this group.
You're welcome. See everyone at networking.